Donald Trump warns, saying they'd put me in jail. I think they'd do a lot worse if they could, but he's talking about the Democrats and the onslaught, lawfare. We have a bunch of different criminal proceedings we're covering here. We also have this civil proceeding, which is borderline criminal. I mean, the sanctions that would be against Trump are so punitive. They're talking about taking away $250 million away from him and taking away his property and his businesses out of the state of New York. It's insane. But we are finished with the government's case in chief, Letitia Tishy James's case, and we are still not done yet. We have one motions hearing that we're going to talk about today where Donald Trump's defense team filed what's called a request for a directed verdict, saying that the government finished their case. Their presentation is so terrible that even if you found in their favor, Judge, it's not enough to meet the threshold. In other words, they didn't meet the elements to even prove a claim, and so you have no choice but to give us a directed verdict without us even presenting one shred of evidence. And so we'll go through the trial proceedings there and see how one avenue of attack is being defended against by Trump and his defense team in New York, the case brought by Tishy Letish James. Now, we also have some inkling that Trump is aware of what they're doing, right? He understands that they want him in jail. If they could take him off the field, they would do it. And Chris Christie is somebody who confirms that for us. So we're going to listen to him explain to us that they're going to be fighting all the way to the convention. He's basically guaranteeing that Trump is going to be convicted. And I think he's right about that. I mean, it's already set up as far as I can tell. And so Trump showed up on this show. Now, this is Buck Sexton, the ex-CIA officer who replaced Rush Limbaugh on his show. And so he has Trump on, and he's there with Clay Travis, and they're having an interview with Trump, and they ask him this question, like, do you think this deep state is trying to put you in jail? Do you think these Democrats are trying to round you up and lock you up?
I was always of the opinion that a thing like this couldn't happen. In other words, you protect your former presidents. It's a terrible thing to go after a former president, other than if you're in a banana republic.
And a possible future president as well,
and
which
a possible,
adds to it.
yeah, it's possible.
Do you think they would put you in jail, and do you think that would benefit you?
I don't want to say about benefit because I don't want to predict that, but would they, if they could? I think they would do it. Yeah, I think it's not beyond them. I think these are very deranged and angry people.
Have you?
Yeah, they are deranged. They are angry, and that's why they want Trump gagged. That's why they want him, honestly, I think, in jail. There's a huge swath of people that would like to see that happen. And honestly, I think they'd like to see the reaction to that happen, because obviously there would be a big contingent in this country of people who'd be very upset about that, and rightfully so. But what would the consequence be? I think they are kind of nudging for that. You know, they kind of would be okay if something kind of popped off a bit. That way they could say, MAGA insurrectionists. We told you, domestic violent extremism. So they're just, kind of squeezing everybody, putting everybody into this pressure cooker, and we're just getting warmed up, right? We have like a civil fraud trial we're talking about. Wait until we fast forward to March and we've got the January 6th insurrection trial underway. It's going to be madness. So Chris Christie is already up to speed on it. And, the question is, why are these guys hanging around? Why are they, with 2% of the polls just kind of, sitting in the buffet line, waiting for something to fall off so they can pick it up off the floor? We're asking ourselves, what are you doing? And Chris Christie is here. He's explaining to us, well, Trump's going to be convicted. Hello. We already know it. He hasn't even had a trial yet. Everybody who used to be a prosecutor, so-called, and cared about the presumption of innocence and due process, he's already convicted the guy, right? So he's going to come and lecture us regularly about how Donald Trump is anti-democratic and whatever, but he's already convicting a guy. What happened to due process and the presumption of innocence, Chris?
Donald Trump is going to be convicted. And what that New York Times poll from earlier this week shows you is that when he is convicted of a crime, his support collapses, especially in all those swing states that he was doing well in. But after a conviction, he will lose every one of those states to Joe Biden. Republican voters are going to get smart about that. They're going to see it, and they're not going to make him our nominee. But we're going to have to fight it all the way to the convention. And that's exactly what I intend to do, because I'm the only candidate who's been making the case against Donald Trump from the day I entered the race. Not that he's not good for the party, which he isn't, but that he is unfit to be president of the United States, that our standards have to be higher than having a liar in the Oval Office, a criminal in the Oval Office. And I'm going to continue to make that case right up into the convention.
Right up into the convention. So do you see where this is going? Now, Ron DeSantis is making similar statements saying, well, the Alvin Bragg charge is illegitimate, but all these other three are legitimate. So in other words, these candidates are just waiting for the government to take out their top opponent so that they can swoop in there, right? It's like actually pathetic and pretty cowardly as far as I can tell. It's like, why don't you just win outright? Why do you have to have the government of your political opponent take out the top person who you're trying to beat? It's pathetic. But of course, this is what the Republican Party is doing. And then you have Vivek at the debate saying, hey, Rana, why aren't you doing anything to rally resources, to muster up some legal defenses to fight back against this one issue? Nobody even wants to talk about the Trump prosecutions, as though the DOJ and the corrupt FBI are a non-issue in this election. While the rest of us are wondering why they're ignoring one of the key issues in the country, because as we said, if you can't have a functional justice system, what else do you have? Where are the laws? What do they matter? You have a bunch of laws written all over the place, but if you can't enforce them against the standard, they're meaningless. So this is what is happening in one sector of the prosecutions brought against Trump. We're back in New York City. Adam Klasfeld is reporting for us, and he is there in court. Now, he tells us the state's case is over. Now, they might recall CFO who was convicted Weisselberg back at some point, but at this moment, we're here for a motions hearing, right? So the government, Tishy, is trying to block testimony from the defense experts. They say, yeah, you don't need to present a defense, okay? Your expert witnesses are irrelevant. So Trump, why don't you just take your punishment and eat it? That's why we're here. So we begin, court's in session. Judge Engerong opens the door. Everybody's bracing for impact. Does he have a shirt on? Whew, he does. All rise. Oh gosh, he's here. Thank God he's wearing his robe today. All right, please be seated. We begin. Now, Trump's attorney stands up. Good morning, Your Honor. Today, the defense would like to begin with a presentation of a motion for a directed verdict. And this is, Your Honor, this, as we know here, this is a motion for a directed verdict, meaning the case is now completed as the presentation has been completed by the government. They haven't met the standard, right? They've fallen below the threshold. There's no way they can win. We're going to deliver our argument. You're going to believe us. And at the conclusion, you're going to find that we are not liable for this civil fraud. No damages. Judge is like, yeah, right. So, okay. Now, Christopher Keese, Trump's defense, brought a slideshow with him for the arguments, which I'm a big fan of. Shout out to PowerPoint. So he says, hey, Adam is saying, the last time this happened, the judge said that there's enough evidence to fill this courtroom. And we saw that, which is also amazing, meaning the judge has already come to a conclusion midway through the state's case back in October 25th, right? The judge, we were like on day 3 or 4 or whatever it was, or week 2 or 3 or whatever. And, judge has already made his decision. There's enough evidence here to throw him in jail for 30 years. All right. So Trump's defense says, Your Honor, we're here today asking the court for a directed verdict. And I want to be clear about this. What we heard from the state and from Tishy's prosecutor, the claims involve literally only successful and profitable loan transactions. Nothing was in the red. There was nothing delinquent. Nobody lost money. Everything was above board. Everybody was happy, celebrating with champagnes. That's why we're here today. And I also want to add, these loans were so above board that there weren't even a late payments, not a one. And the loans were all paid back on time. Trump pays on time. He says, Your Honor. And so, quite frankly, we're here. There's no victim in this case at all. There's no complainant. There's nobody even upset here that we're fighting for, so-called. There's no injury. And we have gone through this case with the government presenting their so-called evidence. And all of that has been established right now. And you can see it. And Your Honor, I want to be clear about this. My client, Mr. Trump, the former president of this United States, he has been an expert in real estate for the past 50 years. And if you had him testify in any court in this country, he would be immediately qualified as an expert on real estate. In fact, there's nobody who's changed the skyline of New York City more than my client, the president. And he says, Your Honor, I also want to talk about this concept of materiality. Now, this is something the government spent a lot of time berating on. But materiality, that is to say, the question we have before us is, did any of these so-called false financial statements, did they even matter at all to the banks and the insurance companies? I mean, they're saying there were differences here, Your Honor, but we've got no evidence of a victim. And we can't see if there was any harm. In fact, the question is, was it material at all? Did it matter to their loans or coverage? Or would they have given Trump the loans but for those financial statements? Would they have done it anyways? Was it consequential? And the government hasn't proven it here. Next slide. You see here, Your Honor, the court stated, you said, Your Honor, this court, in its testimony, you said the court is, quote, not here to hear what President Trump has to say. And he put that up on the big PowerPoint slide. And he's got his laser pointer and he's like circling it. Yeah, Judge, see that one? Right there. And Engeron interjects and he says, oh, wait a minute. To that slide, I'm offended. He says, Mr. Keese, did you hear what I said right after that? You're singling me out. Did you hear the next words that came out of my mouth? The government pipes up, from their end. Tishy not, of course. She's back, even there. But the AG's counsel said, Your Honor, I heard what you said. You said that you're here to hear Trump's answers to questions. You're here to hear Trump's answers to questions. So apparently the judge said, I'm not here to hear. We're not here to hear what President Trump has to say. We're here to hear Trump answer questions. So I guess that little nuance is different, right? It's not Trump's opinion, it's Trump's answers to questions. And so Engeron says, I can't believe you used that slide, Mr. Keese. That slide is very misleading to this court. I didn't say that. I clarified it after. And Keese says, well, you said it, Judge. I thought we were taking things out of context here for our own gain. I thought you guys were doing that. I thought I could do that too. Sorry, I was mistaken. Next slide. He says, Your Honor, now I want to make the point that disclaimers that Trump mentioned, and remember, the disclaimer statement is this paragraph in these contracts where the banks are doing these deals with Trump, and Trump needs a loan to finance his property. He contacts the banks. The banks say, well, how many assets do you have to secure the loan? And Trump says, I got this evaluation for this stuff. I got all this stuff over here, and this secures your loan for $100 million, blah, blah. And so they're transacting and emailing and conversating all this time. And then when they finally fill out the paperwork, there's a disclaimer that Trump puts in there. He says, listen, okay, all this stuff that I told you, it's just words, right? This is like our opinion. And so we disclaim the accuracy of all of it, right? So just so you know, like, this is our estimate. This is our best work. Like, you trust us, okay? But you got to do your own due diligence on this. You're a bank. Don't be dumb, okay? Don't take our word for it that there's like 100 million here because, we're not liable for the mistake. Figure it out on your own. If you do it and you think that we're solvent and you believe that assets are legitimate because you can go look up the records and validate it, then good. Then you've done your own independent analysis and you're not relying on ours. And so you can't make us liable for this assessment, which we're just saying is our interpretation of an estimate. And they do this like many times, okay? Every time they put a document up in front of Trump, he's like, yeah, there's a disclaimer in that one. Yeah, there's a disclaimer in that one. Yeah, and this is how banks do it. Like, they know what they're doing. So he says, Your Honor, I want to be clear about this. Every disclaimer in Trump's statement of financial conditions undermines the claim of fraudulent intent. If he intended to commit fraud, then he wouldn't have put that in there. He would have just said, I have all of these assets. He would have just said, Mar-a-Lago's worth $1 trillion. And the bank would have been like, wow, $1 trillion? He's like, yeah, totally. $1 trillion. We're like, well, okay. But Trump says it's $1 trillion, but that's what I think it's worth. But you might have a difference of opinion on that, right? And so you should do your own due diligence. I'm not guaranteeing you that. It's just my opinion. So go do your own thing. And that's not fraudulent, okay? It's saying, this is my opinion. Go investigate it. If you have a different opinion, then come back here and we can not do the deal. If I think it's worth $1 trillion and you think it's worth 18 million like Tishy does, then there's not going to be a deal, obviously. But if you go and you say, well, I guess your evaluations are pretty good, and you agree to it, knowing that the disclaimer is in there, how is that intentional fraud when it's like openly in the document? Like, don't trust my report. Figure it out on your own. So he says it's clearly no intent of fraud. It's in every single contract that they put up on the screen. Engeron's sitting there. He's like, oh, well, I don't like that point. It's a good point, but I hate your client. So carry on, Mr. Keese. And he says, by the way, Your Honor, next slide. And there's a big, ugly face of Michael Cohen on the screen. You know how ugly that guy is. It's just the worst. And he's on the screen, and everybody in the jury's like, the court, but he's on the screen. And they say, Your Honor, this convicted perjurer, Michael Cohen, he was in this courtroom and he admitted to perjury on the stand. We asked him point blank, aren't you a convicted perjurer? He's like, yeah, I am. I can't even believe I'm here. He said, Your Honor, in fact, Cohen was here saying that he has lied in every court where he has appeared. We asked him time and again, did you lie here? Yeah. Did you lie here? Yeah. Did you lie here? Yeah. Are you lying now? No, I'm not lying now, says Michael Cohen. Okay. His slideshow brands Cohen star witness, hopefully with his ugly mug up there, and scoffs at what he describes as the AG, so Tishy, retreating about Cohen's significance to the case. He's like, they brought him in here like he was going to be a slam dunk, and then they realize this guy's a total liar and has zero credibility at all. He says, Your Honor, moreover, Cohen's testimony that Trump gave him directives in code language, it's not even credible at all. He said that Trump was communicating him to do these things and then he just did it, but obviously it doesn't make sense, and this is why. But the judge says, well, hold on a minute. He says, what I think Cohen's claim here is conceptually the same as the scandal that brought Trump's first impeachment. He says, I think the perfect call to Zelensky might be a code, he says. And I don't know what the heck that has to do with anything in this case, but the judge is going back to the first impeachment with the phone call, which was illegitimate based on the Russia hoax. And Zelensky, he got a call? All right. So they continue. Keith says, next slide. Your Honor, next, as we know, Tishy Latish and her prosecutors here today, they have not presented a single shred of proof that the banks in this case would have awarded loans for these projects if the statements of financial condition were different. Saying that Old Post Office and 40 Wall Street, if the statements of financial condition were different, they haven't shown that the banks would have awarded the loans. He says, in fact, Your Honor, they continued doing business year after year after year. So they did a deal. The deal worked out. They continued to do their due diligence. diligence and said they're making their payments on time. This is looking good. Let's do it again. Year after year after year. He says Letish brought in her expert witness and he put her on the stand and he was talking about damages. He was saying, well, Trump should have gotten a loan at this rate, but because Trump got a loan at that rate, that means Trump got a benefit. He should have paid more. But we're asking ourselves, did the bank care? They were satisfied with the terms of that loan. They got paid on time. They did business again. They were making money. So he says, Your Honor, they just brought in this expert witness to just opine on damages. He doesn't know anything about these deals. He simply substitutes his judgment for the sophisticated parties that actually negotiated this. And now he says, I'm going to turn this over to my partner, Trump's lawyer, Cliff Robert. Now he jumps up. We're talking about a directed verdict. He says, Your Honor, just a few things I'd like to explain. He says, I want to add brief remarks on behalf of the president's son. This is the Trump family lawyer. So Christopher Keese is now done. He says, so on behalf of the president's son, Don Jr. and Eric. And he says, by the way, Your Honor, the reason why you should also grant a directed verdict here is because they were not involved in the creation of these statements at all. None of these statements of financial condition had any, the sons were not involved at all. And that's all I have to say, Your Honor. Judge looks over at Alina. Alina stands up. Your Honor, I've got brief remarks that I'd like to deliver for the defendants. Says we've got Alan Weisselberg, Jeff McConney were also individual defendants. And Alina says, Your Honor, I just want to be clear that there are many different people here, and we ask that you look at every individual defendant separately, individually, Your Honor. Thank you. Anything further from the defense, says the judge. You guys, Trump lawyers, he's got a headache. He says, okay, perfect. My friends are up. Hey, government, Tish, you're up next. He throws this, funny little gesture out there. He says, will there be an opposition to the motion for a directed verdict? Obviously. Government stands up, says, we will certainly oppose it, Your Honor. Oh, very clever. Just get to it already. Just oppose it. He says, Your Honor, I want to be clear about this. This is a documents case. This is Tish's prosecutor. Not Tish, obviously. She doesn't do anything in this case. This is a documents case, he says. And each of the three defendants signed documents stating that they were responsible for the information inside the documents and statements of financial condition. Says that's the graveyard the defendants keep whistling past. Oh, gosh. Go write a novel or something. Engeron says, let me ask you, a personal accountant. The judge says to this government person, do you file tax returns? Wallace says, yes, I do, Your Honor. Of course I do. I love paying my taxes. I'm a government bureaucrat. I think everyone should pay their taxes. He says, asked if he uses accountants, Engeron says, do you use accountants to file your taxes? He says, no, I didn't use accountants, but Trump did. What the heck is going on here? So he says, did Trump rely on those accountants at that time? So he used accountants. He's sort of getting into it with this guy. Do you file tax returns? Wallace says, yeah. Do you use accountants? He says, no, I don't, but Trump did. And so Trump relied on those accountants at that time, right? And Wallace, the government, says, yeah, he did. Yeah, he did rely on the accountants, but he's still responsible for those returns. He said, if I gave my accountants false information, I'm liable for that if the returns are fraudulent. So they're saying if Trump gives the accountants the false info, then you're liable for the accountants, right? You can't give the accountants false info and then the accountants do what they think is right and then you blame the accountants for the false info. No. But if you give the accountants the correct info and then they give the false info, then they're responsible, right? So who's responsible for the info? So they say, so Trump gave him the false info and so he's liable for that. And the judge is like, oh, I get it. Thank you. That's how I'm going to get him. Perfect. So Trump's defense stands up. He says, Your Honor, quite frankly, what we have here from Tish's office is like throwing spaghetti against the wall to see what sticks. And Engeron says, hey there, easy, Keese. You got to be careful talking about spaghetti around lunchtime. I'm hungry. Speaking of that, it's a morning break. So the judge says, I've got meatballs on the brain. So he then runs out and does something. And we're back. We got a 10-minute break and we come back. Now we're back and the government is saying that the state should benefit from a streamlined trial. So this guy, Andrew, stands up. He says, Your Honor, we should benefit from a streamlined trial that should flow from their pretrial victory, finding Trump liable for fraud. In other words, you've already settled most of this case. And so let's just get it over with. Like, just give us the damages. And Christopher Keese, Trump's defense lawyer, is not happy about whatever that was. He immediately jumps up, launches into personal attacks against Tishy's lawyers. He says, you people are just the worst. We're here. You've been railroading our client for these past several weeks. And now you want to fast forward this and not even give my client due process? You guys are a piece of works. And the judge says, hey, Keese, calm down over there. That's unbecoming. You should apologize to them for insulting their feelings when they violate your client's rights. Keese says, I'm not apologizing for anything. Deal with it. And so we're going to come back to that. Adam's going to report on that one. That sounds juicy. Okay, so then here's what happens. Case stands up. He says, you know what, Your Honor? I can't believe they're making this request. Tish's government prosecutor, he should get out his phone and, quote, check the internet. In fact, he may want to go check out Russia because Vladimir Putin has some openings for you over there, buddy. And he says, I hate Putin. I have a Ukraine flag in my bio. Judge, help. And the judge says, hey, don't make Putin jokes in my courtroom. Don't get Putin with me. And then he says, apologize, Mr. Keese. And he says, no, he is Putin's little stooge. Why doesn't he go work with Vladimir? And Engoron, he says, Keese, I will not have McCarthyist throwback language like that in my courtroom. And Keese says, I don't care. Your Honor, he's a communist. Send him to Russia. I think it was totally uncalled for and totally incorrect. So apparently Keese was saying send him to Russia. He says, you can't say he's a communist. You can't say send him to Russia. That's totally uncalled for. And that's totally incorrect. And Keese says, okay, well, maybe he shouldn't go to Russia. He walks that statement back slightly. He's like, okay, maybe we're not going to send him over to the Russian front line, but he is a communist and he's been making fun of me. He's been calling me names, ad hominem attacks his entire trial. And he says, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have slammed him back, but he is a little, commie. He says, and by the way, Judge, these communists here, the whole world is watching. All right. The public is entitled to hear from all of our defense witnesses, and they're trying to keep 4 of our expert witnesses out of this case. This is a communist show trial. Maybe he should go work for Vladimir. And the government stands up and hammers this point. He's like, I'm not a communist. I support Zelensky. He says, Your Honor, the government is not trying to block the Trump's case. Only 4 witnesses whose testimony became irrelevant. They're not even relevant anymore. So you issued a pretrial ruling. That's what the issue was about speeding this up. They said, you've already issued a pretrial ruling, Judge. Their experts are not necessary because you've already found them liable. And these experts are going to come in and testify about stuff that you've already decided. And so it's moot now. And so let's just fast forward this. Don't give the defense an opportunity to present their witnesses. And Christopher Keese, that's why he exploded, hits the roof. How dare you? Communist, right? We don't even get to present a case? Judge says there's no goose or gander rule that the judge, he says, you've been hitting our side for this entire trial. And now you're trying to say, and the government continues, they say, Your Honor, and just because all of our witnesses got in, it doesn't mean that all of their witnesses get in, okay? Just because we got a full opportunity to present our case doesn't mean they do. There's no goose or gander rule here that you need to sustain the equivalent number of objections. You can just object them and sustain our objections and overrule theirs all day. And so far, he's not taking the bait about the Putin comment. And so they have a lunch break. The judge goes and gets his meatballs. We're back. So Christopher Keese comes back. He says, Your Honor, sorry, I was just a little hungry. I'd like to come back and I want to apologize for telling the government to consider a job with Vladimir. He said, Your Honor, when you're right, you're right. I want to apologize on the record. I definitely shouldn't have said that Amir should go work for Vladimir Putin. Should not have said that he's a communist. Definitely shouldn't have said that. Just want to clear that up on the record. The AG says, I accept your apology. Slava Ukraini. Ukraine. He says, Engoron says, it would be prudent to let the witnesses in. He says, I think we should have these expert witnesses come. I don't want a retrial of this case, and I don't want to be reversed. And he says, so we better just get to him. He says, now I'm going to add and I'm going to allow the testimony without prejudice to objecting to anything that may be irrelevant. So I'm going to allow it in. And if there's stuff that we don't want in, we can deal with it. He says, I want to be clear. Now, I am not here as the judge today to value these properties, okay? I'm here to decide whether these statements of financial condition were fraudulent. That's all. He says, and I want to address this insinuation by you and Trump's defense counselor that I assigned a lowball value of $18 million to Mar-a-Lago. I didn't assign the $18 million. The judge doesn't like the blame for this. I didn't. I cited an independent appraisal from 2011 that said it was worth $18 million. And so I want to be clear that I specifically disclaimed assigning value to Mar-a-Lago. So get it right. He says, so what I'm going to do here is I am going to let the experts in, but I'm going to cut short any irrelevant testimony, and I'm not going to take the path of least resistance. And so we stand adjourned today. He says, I'm going to take the directed verdict motion under advisement, which means I'm going to go think about it and rule on it, and we stand in recess. Trials adjourned. Have a great afternoon. We're done for the week. So they'll be adjourned. They will not be back tomorrow, and then I think the government is going to be done. We'll see Trump and his defense start their case next week. And so, my friends, shout Shout out to Klasfeld Reports, Adam Klasfeld. Be sure you're giving him a follow at Klasfeld Reports for doing the great reporting. We're grateful to have his transcript, his exscript here on the platform. He does reporting as the senior legal correspondent over for The Messenger. Also previously worked for Law Crime and other areas. So be sure you're following him, doing great work. Thank you, Adam, for the great transcript and for the reporting. But that, my friends, is what's happening in New York. And so we're going to see what happens next week when Donald Trump's case begins in full. We'll be here to cover it. I hope you join us as we do. And of course, if you miss anything here, you can catch all the reports and all the segments on our website at robertgovea.com. Sign up for our daily newsletter there so this stuff gets delivered to your inbox, because there's a lot of Trump trials happening. We don't want you to miss a thing. We'll see you there and here on the next one, and look forward to it.